and welcome to another episode of Play by Pod, the sports podcast that is changing the game of sports broadcasting in Australia by sharing the stories of emerging, rising and established broadcast personalities across the country, all levels and all sports, while sharing valuable insights in particular areas that may just help you with your commentary. Today we have the great pleasure of being joined by Liam Ellison. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here. I will say I've been very impressed with what you put out so far. And I've enjoyed the pod. You've had some great guests, and I hope that I can be half as insightful as some of the people you've had on, because it's been a very good product you put out.
No, I appreciate that, mate. It's look, I just love the journey of being able to chat with people about sport across the country in all different aspects. I mean, there's enough conversation you can have around a beer or two and talk about how your team's going, but you can actually have a conversation or 20 about broadcasting. I think the more you talk about it, the more you dissect it, there's a lot in there to really unpack that is more very casual and very laid back and very social.
Yeah, it is. I'd say it's a pretty niche interest, really, isn't it? I think a few people, they're only interested in the commentators is probably when they bag them, really, if we're on.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but there are, some of us who obviously engage in commentary ourselves, who it's a big interest, and we could probably speak for hours about. So, no, I love it. It's a great idea to create the play-by-pod.
And it's appreciate you reaching out too and being able to jump on board. So your check is in the mail too, mate. Now, if you are interested in these sorts of things, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Play by Pod is available on all main podcast platforms and YouTube as well. If you want to come and see our $1 million mugs on that too, and various clips shared throughout social media across the week and follow on, so on. Liam, mate. I guess the question I'm gonna throw a curveball to you straight away. Did broadcasting find you, or did you find broadcasting?
Yeah, it's a great question. A bit of both, maybe. I'm not someone who grew up wanting to be a commentator, but I think, like all commentators, I grew up sport mad. That was what I did throughout my entire childhood, and coming into university, I think it sort of dawned on me that there was maybe a small possibility that it could be something to do as a career, and I really fell in love with that idea and did my first game. It was a school champs game, actually, Chris, which is topical because I know that's going on right this very moment, a basketball school champs game.
Correct.
And I got an opportunity very late, as often these stories go. It's always a very late call, isn't it, where you do your first one. Probably don't want to listen to that one back, as so many of us. I loved every minute of it. It goes like that. The first one, it's whizzes by the time, and I thought, okay, I've got to keep doing this.
Were you sort of nervous when you got the tap on the shoulder to go, hey, come and have a go, or were you embraced with the enthusiasm and excitement and you couldn't wait to put the cans on and weave your magic?
Yeah, I was definitely nervous. Absolutely. Yeah. There's the feeling of, well, people are listening to this, and obviously for a school champs game, there's a lot of friends, family back in their state where they're from that are watching. So you don't want to stuff up any names and that kind of thing. Definitely was nervous, but I think, that's all right. Experience kind of takes a little bit of that edge off, not all of it.
Do you, casting your eye over the journey, do you find yourself thinking, there could be thousands of people listening, or do you just become so consumed by what you're doing that you don't really care about whether you've got one or 1 million people listening or no one at all?
Yeah, I'd say mostly the latter. For starters, most of my early games were NBL 1, which I know many broadcasters will probably be familiar with. It's been a great platform for many people to start out. And you're probably not looking at massive numbers on that, but once you start to go up into sports where there are a few more people watching, it can be daunting. And I think the moment you start thinking about that, at least for me, is when things can go wrong. So you really do. I think you do have to block it out. It's almost a skill, I think.
Yeah, I fully agree. I whenever I put the cans on, even thinking to an extent, doing the Play by Pod podcast, I just get consumed by the moment. So I block out that external stuff, and I just more concentrated on what's happening in front of me. And I think that's probably more genuine and real. When you are a broadcaster, it's important to just narrow that all down and narrow that energy and just focus exactly what's in front of you and be absorbed by that.
And I think also, I mean, further to the previous point, sometimes it's not all about the number of people watching, but it's about the right people, isn't it? You just never know who could be, whether it's people from the league, players, coaches, people in the community, the sport that you're broadcasting and promoting as a result, will be listening in, and they do take notice, don't they, of the callers. So it's not always the sheer volume, but it's who is tuning in, I think, as well.
So when you were a kid and the question was asked, "Oh, what do you want to be when you grow up?" What was the answer that you spewed out from time to time?
Oh goodness, it's not really anything particularly.
Well, you had no idea.
Yeah, I probably no idea. No idea. I'd say, Chris. I mean, I studied an arts degree out of uni, so it was very much the idea of let's just try some things. So yeah, kind of did stumble into it, really.
Oh, fantastic! Were you? You mentioned your basketball was the first thing you called. Were you a big basketball fan at the time?
I was, yeah, no, always. I grew up in a basketball family, essentially. I mean, located in the southeast of Melbourne. Many people will know that as the heartland of basketball in Australia, and it is. I think I heard a statistic once that it's per capita the most densely populated area for registered basketballers in the world, let alone Australia.
Wow.
Which is remarkable. Yeah, it is a huge part of the community there. So I grew up playing that. Just loved it and always been into NBA, NBL. So it was a big fascination of mine.
Did you find it easy to consume NBA, particularly being in the US market as well? Or was that you were sort of more entrenched in the NBL circuit a bit more when you were growing up as a kid and even into your teens and early adulthood?
Yeah, I think a lot of basketball fans growing up are taken by the NBA. I mean, they marketed it so well,
Of
don't they?
course.
It's just as a kid, it is so alluring, and the time zones are pretty good, I must say. Coming
Mm-hmm.
in, I mean, compared to English soccer, Chris, which comes in at 3 a.m., you're not as a 15-year-old, you're not catching many of those. But certainly, the NBA was something I spent a lot of time watching.
Who's your team?
Oh, Minnesota is the team doing okay
Ah,
at the moment,
nice.
I will say. That's
The
alas,
mighty Timberwolves.
the mighty Timberwolves. That's the one.
Excellent. Well, back when I first started being captivated by basketball, I came into I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I came into more of a golden era of basketball across the world, not just the NBA but the NBL. And at primary school, you were either a Southeast Melbourne Magic fan or you were a Melbourne Tigers fan. And I leaned to the Melbourne Tigers, and that's where Gazy was doing his wonders there on the court, and the Tigers were winning championship after championship, and then you'd flick it over, and MJ's in the tail end of his career. Obviously, the benefit of hindsight, not realizing just how glorious that period was, but going from the Bulls and the Tigers, two teams that have taken different trajectories over the time. Obviously, in the NBL and the NBA's, the team has a little bit to be desired, but I think you're right. It's hard not to be captivated by the NBA, but it fuels your desire for the NBL too.
I got a little bit of jealousy for you, Chris, and all people who grew up in that period. That would have been just awesome. The stories of the crowds of the 90s and the NBL are something else. But I do think that it's things are heading in the right trajectory, no doubt, in Australian basketball. And I was at the Cup Eve game, the Melbourne United, Perth, and the Perth Wildcats, and that was absolutely pumping. I mean, for those who don't follow, it went to overtime and it was 10K. It was sold out and absolutely rocking. So I think the quality of players that are coming out in both our men's and women's leagues, it's maybe could be heading back to that point, Chris. It's pretty exciting.
You mentioned about your debut in the NBL one circuit, and we cannot stress enough. As this goes to as we're talking at the moment, I've had some lengthy conversations on this very day about the strength of the NBL one competition here in Queensland, about what it does for the NBL. What happened there after you called your first game? What's the next stage for Liam in that case?
So I called, would have been 2019 was when we started out there. And obviously, I think COVID halted so many of us in that space. But I've also been doing some school champ stuff, as I mentioned, and some underage championships for Basketball Australia. So for those who aren't familiar, Victoria versus New South Wales, these are the pathways. So I had the pleasure of calling Dyson Daniels, Josh Giddey, a lot of these guys who've gone on to the NBA. They came up through the pathways and just through those networks was sort of pestering about an opportunity for the WNBL. That was kind of that was my goal. I set my sights on that, Chris. I thought I really would love to call the WNBL. And as someone who'd grown up watching it on a Saturday on the ABC, obviously for a long, long time,
Michelle Timms and
yes,
those it was Kieran Spawn, I think. Sorry, there's a few players
Rachel
around that.
Spawn.
Rachel,
Yeah.
that's it. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, that generation of women's basketballers in Australia, and obviously with Lauren Jackson fitting in there too.
That's
It must have
right.
been a glorious time for WNBL in Australia.
Oh, and I grew up on a steady diet of that, Chris. I mean, my dad was always telling me, he said, the Opals when the Olympics are on, they're a good chance for the gold. And I was at this stage, I was quite young. So this was all very new to me. And I was, definitely taken by that. And I've always seen the Olympics as the absolute pinnacle of sport and representing your nation as the absolute pinnacle of sport. And now to obviously have LJ back in the league has just been, it's been incredible. It's almost been, in a way, full circle from that's how I was introduced to it to now I'm calling a game she's involved in. It's it's amazing.
And she still does a lot of work for Basketball Australia as well. She's doing some wonderful things there, and her mum is also got a lot of recognition around the country too. So you're tuning into the ABC, and the WNBL is just popping. What sort of geared you more towards that over maybe the NBL circuit? Did you sort of see that there might have been some opportunity with your drive and desire to have a greater impact and maybe blow up the WNBL circuit with your enthusiasm and with your commentary?
Yeah, well, I'd done some work for Basketball Australia in the media and comm space surrounding, social media and some writing. And I worked on the WNBL for a couple of seasons. So I already had an awareness of the athletes. But obviously, when you start to cover a sport full time, you really become in depth and really follow it closely. So I felt like I had a pretty solid base. I knew the players. I had a really great respect for what they did. And I think, like a lot of people who follow the league, there is a feeling of it doesn't get a lot of the plaudits generally in the sporting community that it should, because it is an outstanding competition. The Opal's obviously one of the most well-performed Australian sporting teams, out of all, right? So there was definitely a desire to get involved there. And I suppose that, seeing an opportunity as well with streaming, there were more games. That's probably the big one, right? There was one game a week, I believe, on the ABC on the Saturday. And now, thanks to the wonders of the internet, Chris, and able to get every game out there into a larger audience, which is crucial to promoting a league. And I think I saw an opportunity to help out and hopefully add, or at least, do justice to the product.
I think we probably saw that with COVID too, that because there was a lot of closures in some parts of the country and sport happening elsewhere, it just opened up the door for the streaming landscape to really explode, really, didn't it? Because of that COVID period, I would think that maybe the landscape or the push for streaming wouldn't have been so hard if it wasn't for COVID, if I had to take a positive spin on it because of the demand to be able to watch content when many of those couldn't physically go to the games.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's no doubt that's had a massive role, and obviously remote calling as well has become a big thing out of it. Which it has its drawbacks, but I think in terms of being able to lower costs and then as a result get more games out to eyeballs, to fans, to people who are consuming the league, I think it is a net positive at the end of the day, I would say.
So you're starting your calling. I'm gathering you slotted into a play-by-play role. Did you have someone sitting there beside you when you were starting to develop? Did you have a coach who was doing color, or were you calling the games on your own?
You know what? I was calling the games on my own. I was down at my local club where I used to play there in NBL one side, the Waverley Falcons. And it was, as much as I wanted to get involved calling, it was also about I wanted to get back involved in the community, right, that I'd played growing up. And look, undoubtedly calling on your own is not the greatest way to learn. So, and I think for a lot of people, it probably is imitation to start with. You kind of just mimic things you've heard and you use phrases you've heard. And then I guess just the more I grew and I thought, hey, there's got to be more opportunities here. And I desire to improve. I started to, watch back my clips, judge myself very harshly, which we all do. We're all our own harshest critics. So in a way, and we were having this chat obviously before we jumped on air, that so many of us are self-taught, right? There's not really that formal training, is there? So Yeah, I think that's to answer your question. It was really just like, let's just have a crack at this and
A
see how it goes.
bit of a baptism of fire. Were you sort of absorbed by the NBL talent that was sort of coming through with the calling? My generation, and probably to an extent, he's still floating through for many generations. Steve Carfino, for me, he was just a wonderful color commentator, and John Casey, who, in my opinion, is one of the underrated callers of Australian sports broadcasting. I think he doesn't get the accolades he deserves, and compared to some of the other bigger names out there. But John Casey, Steve Carfino, they were just amazing when basketball really started to explode.
Yeah, they were. I think, yeah, John Casey is one caller that I absolutely look up to, Chris. He's and yeah, you're right. He probably doesn't maybe get the plaudits in some circles, but I think basketball people really value him, and I think that does come across. And obviously, he's always there doing the Boomers games, the World Cup, the Olympics, and he's made that his own. Does an outstanding job, and I would say in many ways, he's one of the people when I'm thinking, how can I make this little nuance of my calling better? Probably one of the first people I'm onto on YouTube or etc. is a John Casey call.
So you learning the art of calling, particularly basketball. Did you? I know when I've called some basketball games in the past, I've been very fortunate enough that I've had someone who knows the game far more in depth, and I've been able to learn from them while the game's sort of going on, which has been wonderful. But having that person there has helped me learn what a color commentator does. Did you find it challenging or rewarding, sort of over time, being able to learn how you can work on both roles separately? Because obviously, the higher up you get, you've got your color, you've got your play-by-play, and you don't have too much overlapping. They're the singular roles, but when you started, you had to blend them both.
Yeah, yeah. Look, it's certainly an interesting start, I will say, because clearly my role is the host, play-by-play. I'm never going to be a color commentator. I played the game growing up, and I understand it to an extent. I don't go anywhere close in the realm of expert, right? Well, I've had the pleasure of calling with just some amazing basketball minds. I mean, I do a lot of work with Laurie Chiswick and Carrie Graff as well. I mean, these are international level coaches, right? So, yeah, I think there was probably the first few times I stepped out in the NBL one circuit and did start to work with a special, there was that kind of feeling out period of knowing when to throw, how to throw, not step on their toes in any way by giving color. And you can still add not your opinion, but thoughts on the game here and there as a host. But
Yeah.
absolutely, it's a very neutral tone, I suppose.
And I guess that goes back to just listening to the tapes, listening to how the others do it. And that's probably been my advice to people, regardless of what sport you're calling, is that go and just listen, identify who's your specials, who's your play-by-play. If they've got someone by courtside, and just listen to their roles. Don't listen to the personalities. Listen to what they do. Listen when they come in. And I imagine that probably would have helped over time because you've consumed so much basketball calling anyway through the ABC and Fox and all those other channels too. Some of that probably would have just become quite natural for you over time once you got into the rhythm of having a color with you.
I think so. Yeah, I was definitely someone who consumed a ton of sport and as a result, you do sort of have an understanding and a feel for how things should be done. But I will say it's a lot of it is the pre-chat. If you can get on the phone to your specials beforehand, or ideally be there at the game an hour early, and just being like over the players, the storyline, say like, hey, like what's notable coming into this game, and then that okay, there's probably a throw on the away side's point guard, etc., because that's an interesting chat. But I suppose the danger could be if you're just throwing like, oh, how about so and so, and they don't have as much to say. It could make you look perhaps uninformed. So I think that pre-chat with your specials is huge, to be able to not pre-plan it, but have an idea of where the combos are going to go in the lulls in play.
And probably for your sake too, if you're coming in with working with someone that is still trying to build their confidence or is still a bit green, and that okay, you're probably going to have to do a bit more heavy lifting than what you would with someone else who's got a little bit more experience, a little bit more confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's I think open throws are good as well. I never try and ask a closed question because they can take it if they want to take it. And if they don't, let's not throw our teammates under the bus, So I'm big on framing things in those ways where you can just pick up as well if they don't want to follow off on your point.
So what's your preparation like in the lead up to a game? Are you one of those people that shows up to a game and you've got 40,000 pages of notes, or you've just got some dot points to sort of feel that might be topical and some key stats?
I'm probably more of a dot points guy, I would
Mhm.
say. I definitely I watch games. I try to take a lot of things in, but I try not to overload myself, I suppose, with information. And sometimes I think I've found myself before trying to get through points. And of course, we so often hear it, you have a million things written down, you don't use them all, right? So that is the advice. And for me, it's like, okay, these are the things that I think are relevant and should be said, and I'll have those written down. And then all the accessory things, I like kind of have them tucked away in the back of the mind. So yeah, definitely don't overcomplicate it is my personal strategy, Chris.
I do find the benefit of social media too. If you're on the social media of the clubs that you're involved, that you know you're going to call that coming week or that coming day or however it looks, and the clubs will put stuff on social media that might be of interest, like with milestones and things like that, that'll just give you an idea of a little bit more what's happening. But if you're consuming that anyway, I find naturally I sort of absorb that information. So if I read it a couple of times and, I might share it on my socials and I'll go to game day and it's there in my back pocket if I want it. I don't need to write it down somewhere because it's something I've probably taken emotional interest in. But it's because of the wonderful work that the clubs are doing on their digital media front that just make it so easy to engage with the clubs, 24/7, so to speak.
Yeah, 100%. You will get color stories off socials that you would just not find otherwise. A lot of clubs do a great job of posting things about individual players, storylines that you wouldn't have known. And yeah, I'm definitely across that too. And hey, you can have it in the back of your mind, but if you do need to recheck something and make sure your details are correct, have the computer open in front of you. And if you're able to multitask and just quickly scribble away, I mean, I've done that plenty of times. Have the laptop open 100%.
Oh, I find it challenging with basketball when you do have those tabs open with those little stories that you go to refresh, and you've got the in-depth stats in front of you as well, and they're ticking over a million miles an hour. It's there's a lot to consume without going through your pages of stuff because there's just so much stats packed in front of you with basketball live stats as they happen.
Yeah, and I always have a mountain of tabs open.
So you're working your way to the mountain to the WNBL. Where does the door open for you, and how does that look like?
Look, I just kept sending off emails, Chris. I was lucky enough to have worked in the past at Basketball Australia, and that had opened up a couple of relationships where I was able to, I suppose, have that recognition of who I was and what my work was, and I'm sure that probably would have assisted somewhat, but it was just clipping up reels and sending it off, and eventually the opportunity came, and from there it's always the first one, isn't it? Because once you're in,
Mm-hmm.
you certainly don't want to stuff it up. Um, so
So
it was like, okay,
you get that
yes,
phone call from who do you get that phone call from that says, you know what, we love your work, let's get you on board.
yeah, I was. Look, it was through SEN at the time, who were producing that season, and I'd managed to get a hold of the producer's email, and I'd sent off the information to her, and received the call, and it's certainly, it's a feeling of elation, isn't it, when that feeling or when that call comes, and yeah, from that moment, it's like, okay, let's delve right into prepping everything for this upcoming season and just give this everything we've got. And that would have been the 2021 season, 22. So that was the starting block.
Who was your color that day? Do you remember?
Oh, gee.
I know you've
That's
covered a lot since then.
no. Well, I can give you. It would have been either Laurie Chiswick or Jenny Screen. I've been very lucky to work with on many occasions. It's blended in to me who exactly it was on that day, but yeah, both of those callers I've worked with, Chris, and yeah, that season I was paired with them a lot, and yeah, it was fab.
So you put the cans on for the first time, or you get to the venue. How are you feeling? You get, I mean, and as cliche as it is, because I think there's a lot of ways you can sort of feel about it. But when you get there, is it just another game, or do you go, we're here, we're here at the big dance?
Yeah, there is a little bit of that feeling of being at the big dance. I will say I guess I had a bit of confidence in that I felt like I knew the players, I knew the league. I felt like I guess deserved to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that kind of underlying confidence, but it's always that maybe nervousness around how it will be delivered. Like that. It's about the polish, which is just so crucial to topping off a product and presenting a product.
There'll be people out there that'll be listening to this and their trajectory that they're on at the moment. They're going to get that phone call to say, "Hey, we want you to make your debut at a professional level," which is going to be exciting for them, which is wonderful. But at the end of the day, you've almost got to work just as hard to condense the fact that it's just another game, because when it's go time, you can't really afford to be too nervous, because this is your time to shine, but you have to be the person that you were before you got that phone call.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think something that resonated with me as well earlier on this podcast, Chris, was your chat with Jess. I mean, she
Mm-hmm.
spoke about the flow state
Yep.
with, in general in life, and commentary is absolutely something for me as well, that I do go into a flow state and time sort of ceases to exist, right? And I think it was a sort of similar feeling in terms of the nerves. Once you're there, the game starts, the tip is away, you do kind of start to disassociate from all those nerves, and you are in the moment. So for me, that was calming.
And I know with a wonderful crew at SEN too, I think you've got a lot of ads you've got to smash out too, a lot of references too. So I think that can bring you down. I think that can sort of take the nerves away really quickly, because
Yeah.
you're trying to keep the ball moving, but you're like, well, I've got to mention all these sponsors, which is great, because I think the gaps where you go, oh, you feel a little bit nervous, well, you're plugging them with ads, and that continues to just weave everything together.
Yeah, look, it takes that one part of the equation away, doesn't it? When you know what you need to say, and you just have to focus on delivering it right, which does build the confidence, I think. And that's an important skill as well. You need to be able to, and someone's got to pay the bills, don't they, Chris? So, seriously, it's important to do. If they're paying to have their space there, you want to be able to, as a caller, do it justice. So it's definitely important.
And you're almost a salesperson for them too, because if whoever
Yeah,
the sponsor is, you're wanting to pump it. You want to be as enthusiastic about them as what the game itself.
absolutely. No, it is. It's part of the role.
So you're calling games at SEN. There's other opportunities that fall your way. Talk us through what happens there, and how you start to increase your diversity with your calling.
Yeah, look, I mean, I was really fortunate that through SEN they gave me more opportunities to call. I mean, it's just finished up my second season calling Hockey One, which has just been I've just been incredible. I've really loved it. It's I mean, obviously hockey is such a fast paced sport, and the skills that these guys have is just incredible athletes running 10K, 10, 15K game. That's just been outstanding. And through that, I mean, I've just to expand, Chris. I mean, it was lawn bowls, 10-pin bowling, volleyball. It's really been awesome to expand the craft, and the more skills and more sports you develop, I mean, the more versatile you are. That it makes you more employable, I suppose.
How did you find adapting to different sports? And look, I'm going to throw 10-pin bowling and probably volleyball for an example. Probably a bit more volleyball, because as Australians, we probably get a lot more exposure to that when we come to Olympics and Com Games. So there's not a lot of visual content out there for you to go, okay, well, I've got the call up, I'm going to call this sport, but I have nothing or very little to sort of reference of. How do you go about that?
Yeah, it's a great question you ask, because, as you said, it is an Olympic sport. And what I've noticed with a lot of the Olympic broadcasts are there's often more of an angle towards specials.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit less play-by-play, which obviously that is my role. That's my skill. So it was accepting that my style is probably going to be a little bit different to what you would find on an Olympic broadcast. And I guess it's taking your strengths and applying it to that sport, right? So it can be that little bit stop-start between points, but once the ball is in play in volleyball, it is high intensity, high octane, right? So you just try and keep up with that action as much as you can. And if you can bring that same excitement that you bring to a massive three going down in basketball to a huge spike in volleyball, that energy and passion is going to come through.
Would you reckon at times, regardless of what sport you do, you are a sporting fan first and you're a broadcaster second?
Yeah, that's look. I feel like it's a combination of both. I reckon.
Mm.
I'd say
Yeah.
you have to have that fan element to because people can tell if you're enjoying it or you're not enjoying it. Right, it comes
Mhm.
through. But at the same time, you obviously don't want to go too much
Yeah,
too much.
yeah.
Do you?
Yeah, I find when I'm calling, it doesn't matter what sport it is and what level it is.
Hmm.
I find I'm probably more of a fan first. I know even when I was involved in the recent AFLW call, I'd be giving fist pumps because I started putting the camera on just to do some recordings of us in the commentary box. And if there was a really good tackle, I was giving fist pumps and to myself and just getting really excited. So I
Yeah.
couldn't help but be a fan. And it's like, okay, all right, we've got to call the game. We've got to call. But it's good because I think it helps. I find personally it helps you probably be more of a neutral, and you're just enjoying what's happening in front of you.
Oh, I'm always making hand actions. I am pumping my fist. And not obviously no one can see what you're
No,
doing.
no.
But
Unless you're in the stands.
yeah, well, exactly. If someone had a video on some of the faces and things that I'm doing while I'm calling, it would be quite entertaining, I reckon, Chris. But yeah, I think, I mean, even though these things don't, I think it does come through on the call. Actually, really,
Mm,
now I think about it, it's that those things it gets you in the zone, and that's what is important.
that's fantastic, mate. Now, we I have to ask you the holy grail question. If you're a few years down the track and you're like, this is the Mount Rushmore of what I would love to do.
Yep.
What is it? What are you calling, and what gets you pumped for it?
I'd love to call an Olympics,
Hmm.
like so many of us. Probably circling back to an earlier point, I really think representing your nation is
Hmm.
the pinnacle of sport, and I would just love the opportunity to call at that level. And basketball has always been my, favorite sport growing up. I would love to add the NBL and the Boomers to that
Hmm.
alongside the WNBL. That would be the big goal, and hockey as well. I mean, I'd love to continue really entrenching myself in that because I've really taken to that over the last couple of years. So probably the international landscape would be the answer, Chris.
Yeah, that's I can't blame you for that. It's nothing better than seeing a country out there. I want to just revert back to streaming and your work at a Hockey One. What we're seeing now is we're seeing a seismic shift in streaming, but we're also seeing a greater development in callers. So the second tier, and even referencing NBL one too, there's great callers all over the country in that second tier competition that is improving the standard dramatically. That if you're up the top, you kind of have to look over your shoulder because that you could get the tap on the shoulder to say you're out because of the talent coming through. But I'm really impressed with the first and second tier competitions across a lot of major sports in the country. The calling is just phenomenal.
Yeah, look, I mean, well, hockey one's probably a little bit of a different one from a call. There's some amazing experts across
Mm-hmm.
the country in hockey one, but it's the newly revamped AHL with some new changes. So Sam Hargraves as well, who
Mm-hmm.
calls hockey one, is another. He does a great job as play by play. There's probably not a lot of play by play callers around the country for hockey.
Mm-hmm.
So it has been sort of an opportunity to step in and try and really step up to the plate and make it my own career, which is what I've been aiming to do. And yeah, compared to the NBL where they're NBL one rather, where there really is a mountain of talent coming through surrounding all the different conferences surrounding the country. Obviously, the North, Central, South, West. There's probably a good base of about 75 of us. Do you think?
Yeah, it's there's just an incredible amount of talent. It's ridiculous. And but even talking about the disadvantages of the NBL one season as well is that a lot of the NBL one championships sort of clash around that period where the NBL clubs want to have access to their players for camps and stuff like that. So it's sometimes it can be the NBL one. We get an opportunity to see the best talent and the second best talent all in the same season, except the seasons are kind of reversed because we get the best talent at the start and then the second tier at the end who are carrying the teams to the finals, which is great as a caller because you get to see that next talent that could be knocking on the door to get a spot in that starting five next year if there's a little bit of reshuffling with the roster.
Yeah, look, that's right. And I think we're lucky that there is such a deep talent pool in hoops around the country because it's so hard to get a gig, right? I mean, you think about how many athletes get a job in the AFL, it's what, close to 800, I think.
Mm-hmm.
In the NBL, you have what, 3 imports per club, and there's 10 clubs. So you're probably looking at 5 or 6 Australians. There's Kiwis as well to
Mm-hmm.
compete. 5 or 6 Australians who are playing meaningful minutes for each team. So that's 50 jobs, you know. So basketball is one of the most participated countries in the sports in the country. So there's plenty of depth and guys who can absolutely play high level who are playing NBL one.
I will also add to that too. It is probably the most highest participated sport in terms of countries across the world. So I
Yeah.
mean, there's so many countries that are playing basketball. So I think that just shows the enormity of the sport and the levels that you can play.
Yeah, certainly. I think what you've got football, soccer is the clear number one, and cricket would chime in there with a huge fan base from India. But basketball would have a pretty fair case to be probably almost the second biggest team sport in the world. Really, I mean, when you look at the sheer number of countries that compete in the World Cup that's put together, there's from all over the place. There are countries that compete.
So as we know in the commentary space, that not everything goes right, and sometimes I say it as a good thing. So often things do go right, and you probably forget those games. Has there been a moment in a game that you've called, whether it's a technical thing or something you call, and it has just gone completely pear shaped?
Gee, you've put me on the spot there, Chris.
That's my job, mate.
Yeah, gee. I mean, look, there's certainly been times where it's gone wrong. I've had calls drop out in the streaming
Mm-hmm.
space, and then coming back, and it's that fumbling through the apology to the viewer, and it's how do you phrase it, and it's obviously addressing the issue at hand, but then not hanging on it too long and moving on. Um, I wish I could give you a more insightful
Yeah,
answer on this
no,
one.
that's good because I feel in my experiences and people I've spoken to, and even just from my calling experience in general, when things go pear shaped, for me, they define a call up because it's hellfire and brimstone, but it's the power to you as a caller to be able to steer the ship back on track and go straight to the finishing line, even when things are falling down around you. And that's it goes back to what we were talking before about calling that big game. You get the call up, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm getting my first game at this level. But no, you've got to condense it down back to basics and go in that way. I think that's the same thing when things go pear shaped. If you can steer the ship back on track, as you said, don't draw enough attention to it, but then just get
Yeah.
back on with business.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's one of the core skills,
Mm.
actually, is not being rattled, right? Because things will go wrong from, there will be times where you make mistakes or you miss a call or you miss an ID or maybe you fumble your words. And sometimes for me, at least, I can feel like, oh, I've just fumbled on this little word and you think everyone is going to smash you for it. It's probably not as big as people do notice mistakes and you don't want to make them. It's very important to be accurate, but the same time, it's moving on quickly, because if you let that can affect the next 30 minutes of your call if you want it to.
Oh, of course, because you could be dwelling on it, and the
Yeah.
more you dwell on that one mistake, because you've got a split second to atone for yourself really quickly.
Mm.
So that's the beauty about calling. Doesn't matter what sport it is. I mean, I'd argue maybe soccer probably it's a little bit more slower paced at times, but when you're talking about your hockey and your basketball and the other sports you call, it is just bang on, straight from one thing to the next. So you have to pick the pieces up pretty quickly and run with it.
You sure do. And I think, at the end of the day, like people will forgive you or in almost every case, I would say, Chris, if you do move on quickly and keep doing your job to a high standard, if you let it affect you and point out your own error, often that's when it will become more noticeable. I mean, there's probably few circumstances where you do need to point out your own error. Sometimes it's simply just IDing them correctly very shortly after.
Absolutely. And it shows the human element of calling as well, because there's so much going on and uh, just people need to recognize that you're not a robot, you're a human. So
Yeah.
some mistakes are going to happen.
That's exactly it. And that is the great game, isn't it? I always think of it in terms of like we're always aiming for 100% on the test at the start of every game. And probably not going to get there, but if I can, hopefully get 88% instead of 87% this game or, whatever your starting base is, that's always the aim to get that little bit better each time.
And there's the other side of it as well, is that you might make a few mistakes and you might think you've done a terrible job and you might have actually put in a 48% game or something like that. But the
Sure.
reality is you get the phone call the next day to go, hey, we want you to call this. Then all is forgiven. That's probably what you judge yourself on sometimes. I think when the phone calls still keep coming, you're doing a good job somehow.
Yeah, I've had games where I've come away feeling pretty rotten, and I listen back and I thought, you know what, that's actually okay. And then I've had times where I felt like it went really well, and I listen back, I'm like, oh, maybe I've, didn't quite judge that as in the moment. You never truly know how it's going to come out until you watch it back.
Exactly. Now, if you are a fan of these sorts of things, make sure you like, share, and subscribe here to Play by Pod. We're also developing other social media platforms as well, including Facebook and Instagram. Some of those things are in the works. But now on to today's game changer topic, and we've touched on it a little bit. And I've gone with the big man on this one here because I'm learning a lot from him right now as we speak. But what is the broadcast landscape like for women's basketball in Australia?
Oh, it's a very broad question, Chris.
Mm.
What's it like? Well, I mean, currently the WNBL streaming on 9 now. So, I mean, make sure you get on board and give it a watch, because it is obviously it is going great guns in terms of the talent that is coming out and joining the Australian athletes out there as well with some of the imports that we're getting. But look, I mean, Wednesdays on ESPN, it's great to have it on TV. And Jason Bennett, who will be, I'm sure, familiar with many of our audience or many of your audience, Chris. I mean, he does the Wednesday games too, just a great job, and he's been a huge supporter of the league for a long time, Jason. So. Yeah, certainly. I mean, look, in terms of where it's at, I mean, it's a broad question you ask, Chris.
Yeah, I thought I wanted to poke the bear a little bit because
Okay.
there'll be opportunities in future podcasts to go a little bit more in depth. But we're we cast our way back to earlier in the podcast. We were talking about how you had the one game on the ABC, so
Yep.
you've got that limited exposure, not just for the players, but callers as well. There's a limited opportunity way back when where if you wanted to call women's basketball, you had to get past those people to get the spots because there just wasn't spots available to match the games that were being broadcast.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and as we did mention, it's fantastic that now it is available to a free to our audience on streaming, albeit. And wouldn't it be great one day if there was more than one game a week available on TV? That would just be terrific. But I think at the same time, it's, I think often with calling, right, it's not necessarily about putting your name out to a wider audience. It's about honoring the audience that you do have, I think. And there's an amazingly loyal basketball community and passionate basketball community that every time you get on the mic, they're the people that I'm thinking of. It's like, how do I bring the product, which is amazing, mind you, to the viewers at home and do it the justice that it deserves?
Do you find that because there's such a captivated audience in the male space with the NBL and the success of the Boomers? I mean, what the Opals have done has been absolutely incredible. But do you sort of think that maybe there's that opportunity to go, okay, well, I want to do this product justice and I want to make it sound like it's the biggest thing in basketball right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, it certainly is. I think I honestly, I feel like we don't need to, I suppose, convince people of that. I think it really is happening at a high level in Australia right now. Both our men's and women's programs are doing so well. But you know what? The battle probably is bringing that to the general sporting audience. And I think a major part of that probably is being on TV. And look, a great example is the World Cup when it came, the Women's World Cup that was in Sydney last year. I mean, that did some really great numbers on ESPN, and what a broadcast team they put together there. And I think that showed the potential of what it can be. And everyone obviously points to the Matildas because that was just what a ride that was for that 6 to 8 weeks. It is a challenge, and it's a very crowded landscape, as we know. And the AFLW and the NRLW that have come to the table, they've only continued to make that space more crowded.
Yeah, it's certainly an exciting time if you are a fan of women's sports. You've had that radio exposure with women's basketball? Do you think we're going to start to see just a little bit more attention sort of given in that space, and maybe there's just more avenues that we can start to consume the sport?
I certainly hope so. I mean, I've season 3 now on streaming for myself, and I would love to see it be picked up by more general sporting fans. I'm certainly not the business expert in that space, Chris, as I'm sure you can appreciate.
I know I'm making you squirm here, but you know, I appreciate the in depth and answers because
Yeah,
as a basketball fan, I mean, look, I've got to say as a women's fan, and I mean this podcast is all about you today, mate. But I'll digress to me just for a little bit. But for me personally, this year I had the pleasure of calling AFL, VFL, and AFLW across a range of different platforms. But for me, the most excitement that I got for calling any game was when I put the cans on for an AFLW game because I just wanted that to be the biggest thing ever. And I was just so driven by seeing the success of women. I I had the chance to interview some players after the games, but for me, I built it up so big that I'd got starstruck based off my own build up of some of these players. And I think that's a good trap that we as callers can sort of get ourselves into. But I think it's good, with what you've been able to do in the women's basketball space, that there are superheroes out there. And you're telling the story to make them that big. And it's a great thing to feel.
Look, I mean, you have made me squirm, Chris, because these are things that I haven't thought about, I suppose, until now. And I'm just clocking through it on my head. And I think to answer your question, I've always, as a pre-existing fan and a basketball fan, I suppose, understood the gravity of these athletes. I mean, our Opal stars, WNBA stars, they are amazing players. And I've known that, but it probably sometimes is important for me to reframe in my head that there's a lot of people out there that don't realize that. As basketball people, we know that, but often when just in my regular life, bringing up that I'm calling the WNBL, there's just not much of an awareness sometimes from people, which can be frustrating because it's not just a hobby or this is a legitimately elite league that it would be it would be amazing to have that be recognized in the general community more broadly.
Well, I was very fortunate enough to put the cans on for some big games as part of the National High School Championships, which, as of this date, for those who are listening, it is the week of the National High School Champs here on the Gold Coast. We saw one player who dominated. I think her name escapes me, but there was one superstar player who scored 35 points in a bronze medal game or a gold medal game.
Sure.
She'd already had the tap on the shoulder based on her efforts in the lead up to that tournament and the tournament, that she was going straight to the WNBA as an 18-year-old at high school. And so we're talking about the magnitude of and that was streamed around the country. There's so much great talent out there. You may not get a chance to see them anymore because of what they're able to establish. So anytime you consume a women's basketball game, you could be consuming the future of the sport in the country at that very time, regardless of the level of competition.
Yeah, I feel like I am always trumpeting this to anyone who will listen, is that our pathways are elite. And I think we spoke earlier about the NBA and the allure around that. I think sometimes there's a misconception that it's the NBA and then it's just a mountain of cavernous space and then everything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Clearly an athleticism gap, a talent gap. And obviously I'm talking the NBA and the WNBA in this respect. Our pathways are elite. We've had amazing players that have come through these very doors and gone on to those things. And sometimes it's, letting people know that, hey, this is an elite program and an elite pathway that honestly I would recommend for your own sake. You get down and think about LaMelo Ball, right? He's become just an absolutely he's a massive celebrity and an all-star for the Charlotte Hornets. I mean, all of a sudden now everyone wants a piece of him and he's all over social media. When he was here, it's like it was big, but did people truly realize what he was going to become? I don't know if they did. So yeah, probably not. So maybe it's on us as storytellers to better put that out there, more accurately put it out there in a more consumable way to communicate that to people, that these competitions are very, very high level.
And I think in your case too, when we're talking about the growth of the WNBL, is that perhaps, hopefully, in the future, we might see basketballers over in America come over and do the same thing that LaMelo Ball did. And for those who aren't really across it, instead of going to college, LaMelo come over here to the NBL and played his lights out, and then got into the NBA system. So instead of doing the 3 or 4 years through college, he did his college baptism of fire in the
Yeah.
NBL. I'd love to see some of that siphoning in from the WNBA to come into our local competition, which is a caller for your sake. That'd be just amazing. You could see the future of the sport on a big international scale.
Yeah, well, I
in
mean,
Australia Shores.
it's even better in the WNBL because they actually get a really high leveled imports out, right? Like Kia Nurse, who won 2 championships with the UC Capitals, she was an all-star starter in the WNBA.
Wow.
So the imports are seriously the highest of levels. Now, obviously, your true, maybe absolute A1 superstars often go to Europe during the winter, but we've had continue to get some amazing players down here to play in the WNBL.
And that shows the magnitude of every time you put the cans on, you are telling a story that is shaping the game in a big way here in Australia, because we're experiencing an evolution that we just have not seen in the sport. But I guess that would, for your sake, that probably make you feel really good that you're right in the heart of that, capturing that excitement on the cans, and as part of the element of storytelling, you're telling the story of the future today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an important role. It really is, because I think, it's one of the things that people see when they first turn on a game. There's things like, the crowd or the way the stadium looks or what the caller sounds like. And the product on court can be world-class and amazing. But if some of those things aren't up to par, then for the casual sports viewer who might not watch basketball or understand it at a high level, it might take away from the product. So as a caller, it's really important to try and meet those athletes somewhere close to the high bar they set.
And there's nothing better, I find, in the calling space, that you're seeing someone have a breakout game, and 12 months later, 18 months later, they're tearing it up on a higher level, and you were there, being involved in telling the story about how awesome this player was.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the stories that we come across, Chris, they are truly one of the highlights of it for sure.
Magnificent. Well, again, if you are a fan of these sorts of things, make sure you jump on to Play by Pod and on all the big streaming platforms, mate. We do appreciate your company here on the show, and personally, I appreciate your support since I got this up and going. And I'll probably say we, because we as a network of callers are really banding together and lifting the lid on some exciting things to help inspire other callers. And I've enjoyed the opportunity to hear about your story, and I can't wait to see what's next for you, mate, because I think with what you're doing in the WNBL space, I haven't had that exposure to it previously, and I can't wait to see what you can create for that personally.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's been great to have a chat. Really enjoyed it. It's certainly been a new thing for me. I'm used to talking shop behind a microphone, never about myself. So hopefully there's been a couple of little nuggets that have come out of this chat, but it's been a lot of fun.
Especially with the poking and prodding from my end, mate. That's why I'm on this side of the desk and you're over there. It's great. This is almost like live radio at its finest, mate. I've enjoyed it. It's given you a chance to think too, and that's what we want with callers. We want it. It's a great opportunity to really think and assess about how we can grow and develop what's important to me. And I've, even through our chat, I can see that there's some big things that you're harnessing your energy on that you'll use to make you as a unique caller going forward.
Yeah, 100%. It has been thought-provoking, especially down the stretch. It's been great.